The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered onto the concrete floor of my garage. I bent down slowly, feeling the familiar ache in my lower back, and picked it up. My knuckles were still strong, even if the rest of me had started collecting complaints. I was under my 2009 Ford Taurus when I heard the car pull into the driveway. The engine cut off. A door opened and closed. Footsteps approached. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. Dad, you in here? I rolled out from under the car on my creeper and looked up at my son. Jared stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. He was wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. Work clothes. He should have been at the office. Jared, I said, getting to my feet. What brings you by? He stepped inside, glancing around the garage like he was cataloging everything. His eyes lingered on the toolbox, the workbench, the oil stains on the floor that had been there since before he was born. Just wanted to check in on you, he said. His smile was easy, practiced. How's the car running? Same as always, I said. She's got another 100,000 miles in her if I keep her maintained. He walked over to the Taurus and ran his hand along the hood. Dad, this thing is 16 years old. Don't you think it's time to upgrade? Get something with modern safety features? Safety features don't mean much if you don't know how to drive, I said. I've been driving since before you were born. Never had an accident. I know. He held up his hands like I was being difficult. I'm not saying you're a bad driver. I'm just saying technology has come a long way. These newer cars, they practically drive themselves. I wiped my hands on a rag and tossed it onto the workbench. What's this really about, Jared? He looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Tessa and I have been talking. We're worried about you. You're getting older, and we just want to make sure you're safe. I'm 63, not 93. I know, but humor me, okay? Let me take a look at the car. I've been reading about some common issues with older vehicles. I just want to make sure everything's in good shape. I crossed my arms. I maintain this car myself. I know every bolt, every wire, every fluid line. Dad. His voice took on that edge I'd been hearing more often lately. Patient but strained, like he was talking to a child. Just let me look, all right? It'll take 5 minutes. I stepped aside. He walked around the car, crouching down to examine the undercarriage. He spent longer than necessary under the rear bumper. When he stood up, he brushed off his hands. Everything looks good, he said, but I'd feel better if I could do a more thorough inspection. Mind if I take it for a drive? Maybe check the alignment, test the brakes? The brakes are fine. I replaced the pads 2 months ago. Dad, please. Let me do this. For my peace of mind. I studied his face. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen him. Maybe he really was worried. Maybe I was being stubborn for no reason. All right, I said. Keys are hanging by the door. He grabbed them and slid into the driver's seat. The engine started smoothly. He backed out of the garage, waved, and drove off down the street. I stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the conversation had left a sour taste in my mouth. 2 days later, I needed to pick up some parts from the hardware store across town. I grabbed my keys and headed out to the garage. The Taurus was parked where Jared had left it after his test drive. I climbed in and started the engine. Everything sounded normal. I backed out and headed toward Main Street. The hardware store was 20 minutes away, just past the old textile mill that had been converted into artist studios. I parked in the lot and went inside. The place smelled like sawdust and metal. I found the parts I needed, a replacement fuel filter and some hose clamps, and took them to the counter. That's when I saw Jared's car pulling into the lot. He parked 3 spaces away from me. I could see him through the window, talking on his phone. He hadn't noticed me yet. I paid for my parts and walked outside. He looked up as I approached. His expression flickered, surprise, then something else I couldn't quite read. He ended his call quickly. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Buying parts," I said, holding up the bag. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I needed to pick up some light bulbs for the office." He gestured vaguely toward the store. "Small world, huh?" "Yeah, small world." We stood there in the parking lot, the afternoon sun beating down on the asphalt. A truck rumbled past on the main road. "Listen, Dad, while I have you here, have you been remembering to take your medications? Tessa mentioned you seemed a little confused last time we talked on the phone." I stared at him. "I'm not confused, and I don't take any medications except for the occasional aspirin." He laughed, but it sounded forced. Right. I must have been thinking of something else." I drove home slowly, paying attention to how the car handled. The steering felt slightly different. Heavier, maybe. Or was I imagining it? When I got back to the garage, I pulled in and shut off the engine. I sat there in the driver's seat thinking. Jared had spent extra time under the rear bumper. He'd insisted on taking the car for a test drive. And now he'd shown up at the same hardware store I was at, miles from his office, right after I'd driven there. I got out and walked to the back of the garage. I kept my old creeper next to the shelves where I stored my seasonal tools. I grabbed it and rolled it over to the car. I lay down on the creeper and pushed myself under the rear bumper. At first I didn't see anything unusual. The exhaust system looked normal. The differential was fine. The fuel tank had no leaks. Then I spotted it. A small black box about the size of a deck of cards, attached to the undercarriage with industrial-grade magnets. A thin wire ran from it to what looked like a small antenna. I stared at it for a long moment. My heart was beating faster now, that familiar adrenaline response from years of working under pressure in tight spaces. But this wasn't a mechanical problem. This was something else entirely. I reached up and pulled the device free. The magnets released with a soft click. I rolled out from under the car and stood up, holding the tracker in my hand. The casing was unmarked, but I could see the LED indicator light on one side. It was green, active. I walked over to my workbench and set it down. I should have been angry. I should have called Jared immediately and demanded an explanation. But I wasn't angry. I was something else, something colder. I opened the drawer where I kept my smaller tools and found a roll of bubble wrap. I wrapped the tracker carefully, then placed it in a small cardboard box. I printed a label using my old typewriter. I'd never gotten the hang of computers, and addressed it to a fabricated name at a random address in Tijuana, Mexico. The next morning, I drove to the post office. Glenn Porter was behind the counter sorting mail. He'd been the mail carrier in this town for 30 years before taking the desk job. We'd gone to high school together. "Morning, Walt," he said. "What have you got there?" "Just a package," I said. "Nothing important." He weighed it, calculated the postage, and printed the label. "Mexico, huh? Didn't know you had friends down south." "Old contact," I said. "Owes me a favor." He handed me the receipt. "Should get there in about a week." I thanked him and walked out. As I drove home, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease slightly. Whatever Jared was planning, I'd just thrown a wrench into it. That night my phone rang around 8. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Dad?" It was Jared. His voice sounded strained. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine." "Good, just checking in." He hung up. I set the phone down and stared at it for a moment. The next morning, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered it. "Hello?" Static, then a voice. Male, accented. "Mr. Hayes? Walter Hayes?" "Speaking." "My name is Rodrigo. I work at a shipping facility in Tijuana. We found something unusual in a package addressed to this facility. The name on the package doesn't match any of our clients, so we opened it to verify the contents." I sat up straighter. "Go on." "It's an electronic device. A tracker, I think. It's still transmitting. We weren't sure what to do with it, so we traced the return address and found your phone number. I closed my eyes. I sent it there on purpose. Oh. A pause. May I ask why? Long story. Can you tell me anything about the device? Like, who might have access to the signal? I can try. Give me your email and I'll send you what I can find. I gave him my address. 20 minutes later, I received an email with several attachments, technical specifications, signal logs, and something else. The device wasn't just transmitting to one receiver. It was paired with multiple devices, at least 3, maybe more. I printed everything out and put it in a folder. Then I sat at my kitchen table and tried to understand what I was looking at. My son had put a tracker on my car. My son was monitoring my movements, and he wasn't doing it alone. The question was, why? I spent the next 3 days pretending everything was normal. I went to the grocery store, the bank, the post office. I followed my usual routine down to the minute. If Jared was watching, if he had eyes anywhere, I wanted him to see exactly what he expected. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, nothing that suggested I was piecing things together. But beneath the calm surface, my mind was racing. I found myself replaying the past year, searching for patterns I'd missed. Small moments that hadn't seemed important when they happened, but now glowed like warning lights. It had started about 8 months earlier. Jared had stopped by one evening with Tessa. They'd brought takeout from that Italian place downtown. Lasagna, garlic bread, enough food for a small army. We'd sat at my kitchen table making small talk. Halfway through dinner, Jared reached into his bag and pulled out his laptop. "Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something," he'd said. "Your banking situation." "What about it?" I'd asked. "Well," he said, choosing his words carefully, "you're still going into the branch to make deposits and withdrawals, right? Writing checks by hand? That's how banking works." Tessa had smiled. One of those gentle, patronizing smiles. The kind people use on children or clients who don't understand the fine print. "Mr. Hayes, most people do everything online now," she'd said sweetly. "It's faster, more secure, and you can access your accounts from anywhere." "I don't need to access my accounts from anywhere," I'd replied. "I access them from the bank." Jared had rubbed his face, trying not to show impatience. "Dad, I'm not trying to overhaul your life. I just want to make things easier. Why don't we set up online banking? I can help you get started." At the time, it hadn't seemed like a trick. Jared worked in finance. He understood these systems better than I ever would. And he was my son. Trust had come naturally. "All right," I'd said. "Show me how it works." We'd spent nearly an hour setting up usernames, passwords, security questions. Jared had written everything down neatly on a piece of paper. "Keep this somewhere safe," he'd said. After they left, I'd folded the paper and placed it in my desk drawer. For a few weeks, I logged in occasionally, checking the balance, scanning the statements. Everything looked normal. Then, without noticing, I drifted into relying on Jared. It was easier. He seemed eager to help, and I didn't think twice about letting him. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with the tracker information spread out in front of me, I wondered what else I'd handed over without realizing it. I got up, walked to my desk, found the paper with my banking details, and returned to the table. Then I picked up my phone and called the bank. "First National, how may I help you?" a woman answered. "I'd like to review my account," I said. "In person. Can I come in today?" "Of course, sir. Any time during business hours." "I'll be there within the hour." I drove to the bank and parked. Inside, I approached the teller window, where a young woman with dark hair greeted me. "How can I help you today?" "I need statements for the past 6 months," I said. "All activity." She typed on her computer, then looked up. "You know, you can view everything online if you prefer." "I prefer them printed." "Of course." She disappeared into the back and returned with a thick stack of papers. Here you are. I took the statements to my car and sat behind the wheel, reading them one by one. Most transactions were ordinary: pension deposits, utility bills, grocery purchases. But then I noticed the small withdrawals. $50 here, $100 there, modest enough not to raise alarms, but consistently spaced, and not from ATMs I used. I added them mentally. Over 6 months, about $2,000. Gone. Then I spotted the transfers. Small amounts moved monthly into a savings account I didn't remember opening. Always on the 15th. I checked the dates against my calendar. The 15th was always the day of the auto club meeting. I was gone for hours. A perfect window. I stared at the papers, letting the realization settle. Then I drove home in silence. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, my mind grinding through every detail: the tracker, the unexplained withdrawals, the conversations that now sounded entirely different. The picture was forming. And it wasn't pretty. I thought about the day Jared was born, the way he'd looked up at me with those wide eyes, trusting and helpless. I'd promised myself I'd protect him, teach him, give him a better life than I'd had. Now he was trying to take everything I'd worked for. I got up around 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen. I made myself some tea and sat at the table. I thought about my wife. What would she say if she were here? Would she believe me? Yes. She'd always been good at reading people. She would have seen through Jared's act long before I did. I finished my tea and went back to bed. This time, I slept. The next morning, I went to the garage. I opened the filing cabinet where I kept all my important documents: birth certificate, marriage license, the deed to the house. I found what I was looking for in the bottom drawer: a manila folder labeled estate plan. I'd hired an attorney back when my wife got sick. We'd wanted to make sure everything was in order. The attorney, a guy named Marlon Vega, had helped us set up a will, a living trust, all the legal protections we'd need. I pulled out the documents and started reading. Most of it was standard stuff, but there was one section that caught my attention: a clause about financial authority. It stated that I retained sole decision-making power over all my assets. No one could make changes or transfers without my explicit written consent. The clause also included protections against coercion and undue influence. At the time, it had seemed like overkill. Marlon had insisted on it. "You never know," he'd said. "People get older, family dynamics change. This just makes sure no one can take advantage of you." I'd signed it without thinking much about it. Now I read it 3 times to make sure I understood what it meant. Then I picked up the phone and called Marlon Vega's office. "Vega and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Marlon Vega. It's Walter Hayes." "One moment, please." I waited. Then Marlon's voice came on the line. "Walt, been a while. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. "I need to talk to you about something. Can I come by your office?" "Sure. When were you thinking?" "How about tomorrow morning?" "Let me check my schedule." A pause. "I can do 9:30. Does that work?" "I'll be there." I hung up and sat back in my chair. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the garage floor. My phone buzzed. A text from Jared. "Hope you're doing well. Call me when you get a chance." I stared at the message for a moment. Then I set the phone down. The next morning, I drove to Marlon Vega's office. It was in a small professional building near the courthouse. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked into the reception area. The secretary looked up and smiled. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Vega is expecting you. Go right in." Marlon's office was cluttered but organized. Law books lined the shelves. Files were stacked neatly on his desk. He stood up when I entered and shook my hand. "Walt, good to see you. Have a seat." I sat down across from him. He settled back into his chair and folded his hands. "So," he said, "what's on your mind?" I pulled out the folder with the estate plan documents and set it on his desk. Then I added the bank statements and the information about the tracker. I think my son is trying to take control of my finances, I said, and I need to know if he can. Marlon picked up the documents and started reading. His expression didn't change, but I could see his jaw tighten slightly. After a few minutes, he looked up. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. I told him about the tracker, the withdrawals, the conversations. I told him about Jared's insistence on managing my online banking. When I finished, Marlon leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Okay," he said. "Here's the good news. The estate plan we set up is ironclad. Jared can't legally touch your assets without your written consent. The clause we included specifically protects against this kind of situation. And the bad news? The bad news is that if he's making unauthorized withdrawals, that's fraud. We'd need to prove it, which means gathering evidence. The tracker is a good start, but we need more." "Like what?" "Documentation, timestamps, anything that shows a pattern of deception or manipulation. If we can demonstrate that he's been acting against your interests while pretending to help you, we can build a case." I nodded slowly. "What do I do next?" "Keep a low profile. Don't let him know you're onto him. Continue with your normal routine. And document everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every unusual transaction. Bring it all to me. How long will this take? Depends on how careful he's been. But Walt?" He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You need to be prepared for this to get ugly." "I know," I said. I left his office and drove home. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Jared's car parked on the street. He was waiting for me. Jared was leaning against his car, arms crossed. When I pulled into the driveway, he straightened up and walked over. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Where have you been?" I got out of my car and locked the door. "Out. Running errands." "I tried calling. You didn't answer. Phone was in the car. Didn't hear it." He followed me toward the house. "Mind if I come in? I wanted to talk to you about something." I unlocked the front door and held it open. "Sure." We went inside. I headed to the kitchen and filled the coffee maker with water. Jared sat at the table watching me. "Dad, Tessa and I have been thinking. This house is getting pretty big for just one person. Have you ever considered downsizing?" I measured coffee grounds into the filter. "I like this house. Built half of it myself. Your mother and I raised you here." "I know. And I'm not saying you have to move tomorrow. I'm just saying it might be worth thinking about." "I'll think about it." The coffee maker started burbling. I took 2 mugs from the cupboard and set them on the counter. "There's something else," Jared said. "Tessa and I have been talking to some people. Financial advisors, estate planners. We think it might be a good idea for you to set up a power of attorney, just as a precaution." I poured the coffee and carried the mugs to the table. I set one in front of Jared and sat down across from him. "What kind of power of attorney?" "General power of attorney. It would let me help you with financial decisions if you ever needed it." "I don't need help with financial decisions." He sighed. "Dad, I'm not saying you're incompetent. I'm saying this is smart planning. What if something happens? Wouldn't you want someone you trust to be able to step in?" I sipped my coffee. "Who suggested this? You or Tessa?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does." He looked away. "We both think it's a good idea." "What else does Tessa think is a good idea?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've noticed she has a lot of opinions about what I should and shouldn't do." His expression hardened. "Dad, she's trying to help. We both are. I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. I don't need a power of attorney." "Are you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having trouble keeping track of things. You forget appointments. You don't return calls. I don't forget appointments. Last week, you left the stove on for 3 hours. I didn't leave the stove on." "Yes, you did. Tessa came over and found the burner going." I stared at him. "Tessa has a key to my house?" "I gave her one. For emergencies." Take it back." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're being ridiculous. Take it back, or I'll change the locks." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Fine. Whatever. I'm trying to help you, but if you want to be stubborn, that's your choice." He walked to the door, then turned back. "We're having dinner Sunday. Are you still coming?" "I'll be there." "Good. Maybe we can have a rational conversation then." He left. I heard his car start and pull away. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at my coffee. Tessa had a key. That explained how they'd gotten into the house when I wasn't home. That explained the unauthorized access to my banking information. I needed to secure the house, change the locks, install some cameras. But first, I needed to finish what I'd started with Marlon. Sunday came. I drove to Jared and Tessa's house, a modern 2-story in the newer development on the east side of town. I parked on the street and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, Tessa opened it. "Mr. Hayes, so glad you could make it." She was wearing a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans. Her smile was bright and empty. "Come in." I stepped inside. The house smelled like roasted meat and fresh bread. The living room was immaculate. White furniture, glass coffee table, abstract art on the walls. Jared appeared from the kitchen. "Hey, Dad, want something to drink?" "Water's fine." He brought me a glass and gestured to the couch. "Have a seat. Dinner will be ready in about 15 minutes. I sat down. Tessa settled into the chair across from me, crossing her legs. "So, Mr. Hayes, how have you been? Jared mentioned you two had a talk the other day." "We did." She smiled again. "Good. Because I've been telling people at the community center how lucky you are to have a son like Jared. So attentive. So caring." "What people?" "Oh, you know, the ladies I have lunch with. Some of the volunteers. They all think it's wonderful how involved he is in your life." I took a drink of water. "What exactly have you been telling them?" "Just that you're getting older, and Jared has really stepped up to help. Making sure you're taking care of yourself, managing your finances, that sort of thing." "I manage my own finances." "Of course you do. I just meant that Jared helps you with the technical stuff." Jared came back from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready." We moved to the dining room. The table was set with cloth napkins and matching plates. Tessa had made pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans. We ate in relative silence for a few minutes. Then Tessa spoke up. "Mr. Hayes, have you thought any more about what we discussed? About setting up the power of attorney?" I cut a piece of meat. "I've thought about it." "And I'm not interested." She exchanged a glance with Jared. "May I ask why?" "Because I don't need it. But it would make things so much easier. For everyone." I set down my fork. "Easier for who?" "For all of us. You wouldn't have to worry about managing everything on your own." "I'm not worried." Jared cleared his throat. "Dad, can we talk about this reasonably?" "I am being reasonable." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Thank you for dinner. I should go." Tessa's smile finally cracked. "Mr. Hayes, please sit down. I don't need your help." "Actually," she said, her voice cooling, "I think you do, and I think everyone else thinks so too." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means people are starting to notice things, the way you forget conversations, the way you get confused, the unsafe driving." "I've never driven unsafely in my life." "That's not what I've heard. Some of the neighbors have expressed concern." "Which neighbors?" She shrugged. "Does it matter? The point is people are talking." I walked to the door. Jared followed me. "Dad, wait. Don't leave like this." I turned to face him. "You want me to sign over control of my life, and when I say no, your wife threatens me with gossip and lies." "She's not threatening you. Tell her to stay away from me, and tell her to stop spreading rumors." I left before he could respond. I drove home and went straight to the garage. I pulled out my old mechanical logbook, a notebook where I'd been recording every maintenance task for the past 40 years. I flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. A complete maintenance history for the Taurus. Every service date, every part replaced. Detailed notes about the car's condition, proof that I'd been maintaining it properly. I set the logbook aside and pulled out my filing cabinet again. I went through every document I owned, property deeds, tax records, insurance policies. Everything was in order. Everything was documented. I made copies of the most important documents and put them in a separate folder. Then I called Glenn Porter. He answered on the third ring. "Walt, everything okay? I need a favor." "Name it. Can I store some documents at your place, just temporarily?" "Sure. Want to tell me what's going on?" "Not yet, but I will." "All right. Bring them over whenever." I drove to Glenn's house that night and gave him the folder. He took it without asking questions. "If something happens to me," I said, "or if I ask you for these, give them to Marlon Vega." Glenn nodded. "Got it." The next morning, I went to the community center for the auto club meeting. The room was in the basement, past the gym. About 15 guys showed up regularly. I walked in and found my usual seat. Glenn was already there. So was Tim Morrison, the club president. "Walt," Tim said, "good to see you. How's that Taurus running?" "Smooth as ever." "Glad to hear it. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Someone called me last week asking about you. Wanted to know if you'd been having any trouble with the meetings, missing dates, getting confused." I set down my coffee. "Who called?" "Didn't give a name. Said they were a concerned family member." "What did you tell them?" "Told them you've been coming here for 20 years and you've never missed a meeting unless you called ahead. Why? Is something going on?" "Yeah," I said. "Something's going on." I told him everything, not just Tim, everyone in the room. I laid it out plainly. The tracker, the bank withdrawals, the rumors Tessa was spreading. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Tim spoke. "What do you need from us?" "Witnesses," I said. "If this ends up in court, I need people who can testify that I'm competent." "You got it," Tim said. "Every one of us will back you up." The others nodded. "One more thing," I said. "I'm going to need help documenting everything, dates, times, conversations." "I'll do it," Glenn said. We spent the rest of the meeting planning. By the time I left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. 3 weeks passed. I kept my head down and followed my routine. I documented everything. Every phone call with Jared, every encounter with Tessa, every strange transaction in my bank account. Glenn helped me organize it all into a timeline. We used a large sheet of poster board and pinned everything to it. Receipts, bank statements, copies of text messages, notes from conversations. We met twice a week at his workshop, a converted barn behind his house. "You're building a hell of a case," Glenn said one afternoon. We were reviewing the latest batch of bank statements. "Look at this. Every withdrawal happens when you're at the auto club meeting or at the grocery store on Thursday mornings. They've got a pattern. Can we prove it's Jared making the withdrawals?" "Not directly. But we can show the pattern, and we can show that you didn't make them." I nodded. "What about the tracker?" The Mexico guy sent more data. The device was paired to 3 phones. One of them is registered to Jared. "What about the other 2? "Probably Tessa and whoever else they're working with." I leaned back in my chair. "When should I move?" "Not yet. We need more. Marlon says the more documentation we have, the stronger the case." That was true. In the past week, Jared had called me 6 times. Each time, he'd brought up the power of attorney. Each time, I'd refused. The last call had been different. He'd been angry. "Dad, I don't understand why you're being so difficult. This is for your own good." "No," I'd said, "it's for your own good." He'd hung up on me. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the county clerk's office. A notice about a hearing, something about a routine review of my driver's license. I brought it to Marlon's office the next day. He read it carefully. "This isn't routine. Someone requested a competency review. Can they do that? If they have reason to believe you're unsafe. But here's the thing. This could work in your favor. If you show up, pass the review, and demonstrate that you're fully competent, it undermines their entire case. When's the hearing? 3 weeks. I'll file a response and request that we be allowed to present evidence of your competence, medical records, maintenance logs, testimony from people who interact with you regularly. Do I need to prepare? Just be yourself. Bring your logbook, bring your documentation, and stay calm. Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared. I went to my doctor and requested a full evaluation. Cognitive tests, physical exam, everything. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Patel, who'd been treating me for 15 years, ran the tests and gave me the results. Mr. Hayes, you're in excellent health for your age. Cognitive function is normal. There's no medical reason you shouldn't be driving. Can I get that in writing? Of course. I'll send a report to your attorney. I also gathered every piece of documentation I could find. Maintenance records for the car, receipts from the hardware store, attendance logs from the auto club, testimony letters from Tim, Glenn, and half a dozen other people who knew me. Marlon reviewed everything and nodded approvingly. This is good, Walt. Really good. What about Jared? Will he be there? Probably. He's the one who initiated the review. And Tessa? If she's involved, she'll be there too. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, running through everything in my mind. Every conversation, every document, every piece of evidence. I got up around 5 in the morning and made coffee. I showered, dressed in my best clothes, a button-down shirt and slacks, and gathered my documents. Glenn picked me up at 8. We drove to the county building in silence. Marlon met us in the parking lot. You ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be. We walked inside and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Jared was already there. So was Tessa. They were sitting on a bench outside the room talking to a man in a suit I didn't recognize. When Jared saw me, he stood up. Dad, I'm glad you came. Wouldn't miss it. Tessa smiled. We're all on the same side here, Mr. Hayes. I didn't respond. Marlon guided me past them and into the hearing room. The room was small, with a table at the front and rows of chairs behind it. A woman in a blazer sat at the table, reviewing papers. She looked up when we entered. Mr. Hayes, I'm Magistrate Linda Reyes. This is an informal hearing to review your driving competency. Please have a seat. Marlon and I sat down. Glenn took a seat in the back row. A moment later, Jared, Tessa, and the man in the suit entered and sat on the other side of the room. Magistrate Reyes cleared her throat. Let's begin. This hearing was requested by Mr. Jared Hayes. Mr. Hayes, you have the right to present evidence in your defense. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. Mr. Jared Hayes, you may present your case. The man in the suit stood up. Your Honor, I'm Kenneth Pruitt, representing Mr. Jared Hayes. We're here today because my client has observed significant changes in his father's behavior, changes that suggest a decline in cognitive function. He pulled out a folder and began listing incidents. The stove Tessa claimed I'd left on, missed phone calls, supposedly confused conversations, unsafe driving habits reported by unnamed neighbors. When he finished, Magistrate Reyes turned to me. Mr. Hayes, would you like to respond? Marlon stood up. Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to present evidence. Proceed. Marlon placed a stack of documents on the table. First, a medical evaluation completed last week by Dr. Patel. It confirms that Mr. Hayes is in excellent health, with no cognitive impairment. Second, maintenance records for Mr. Hayes's vehicle. Third, testimony letters from members of the community. He handed the documents to Magistrate Reyes. She began reading. Kenneth Pruitt cleared his throat. Your Honor, these documents don't address the core issue. There are documented instances of erratic behavior. Such as? Marlon asked. such as the tracker. The room went silent. Kenneth pulled out a sheet of paper. Mr. Hayes's son installed a safety device on his father's vehicle. However, Mr. Hayes removed the device and mailed it to Mexico. That's not the behavior of someone thinking clearly. Marlin smiled. Your Honor, may I present additional evidence? Go ahead. He pulled out the information from the Mexico shipping facility, the device specifications, the pairing data, the timestamps. This device wasn't a safety monitor, it was a tracker, and it wasn't just paired to Mr. Jared Hayes's phone. It was paired to multiple devices, allowing constant surveillance. My client removed it because he recognized it for what it was, an invasion of his privacy. Jared stood up. That's not true. Sit down, Mr. Hayes, Magistrate Reyes said sharply. Marlin continued. Furthermore, there's evidence of unauthorized financial activity on Mr. Hayes's accounts, withdrawals made while he was at documented locations elsewhere. All of this coinciding with Mr. Jared Hayes having access to his father's banking information. He laid out the bank statements, the timestamps, the pattern of withdrawals. Kenneth Pruitt's expression tightened. Your Honor, these allegations are outside the scope of this hearing. Perhaps, Magistrate Reyes said, but they're relevant to the question of Mr. Hayes's competency. If he recognized improper activity and took steps to protect himself, that demonstrates sound judgment. She looked at me. Mr. Hayes, do you understand what's happening here? Yes, ma'am. And you're capable of managing your own affairs? Yes, ma'am. She looked at the documents for a long moment. Then she looked at Jared. Mr. Hayes, did you install a tracking device on your father's vehicle without his knowledge? Jared hesitated. I was concerned about his safety. Did you have his permission? No, but... And have you been accessing his bank accounts? I was helping him manage, without his explicit authorization. Jared looked at Kenneth Pruitt. The lawyer shifted in his seat. Magistrate Reyes set down her papers. I'm going to make this very simple. Based on the evidence presented, I see no indication that Mr. Walter Hayes is incompetent to drive or manage his own affairs. In fact, I see clear evidence that he has been managing his affairs quite competently, including recognizing and responding appropriately to what appears to be financial manipulation. She turned to Jared. Mr. Hayes, unauthorized access to someone's financial accounts is a serious matter. I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for review. Tessa's face went pale. Jared opened his mouth, then closed it. This hearing is concluded, Magistrate Reyes said. Mr. Walter Hayes, your driving privileges remain intact. You're free to go. I stood up. Marlin gathered the documents. Glenn walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. As we walked toward the door, I heard Jared's voice behind me. Dad, wait, please. I stopped and turned around. He was standing in the middle of the room, his face red. Tessa was next to him, her arms crossed. Kenneth Pruitt was packing his briefcase. I'm sorry, Jared said. I thought I was helping. I looked at him for a long moment. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd tried to take everything from me. No, you didn't, I said. I walked out of the room. Glenn and Marlin followed me. Behind us, I heard Tessa's voice, sharp and angry. Then Jared's, quieter, defeated. We walked down the hallway. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor. When we reached the elevator, I pressed the button and waited. The doors opened. We stepped inside. As the elevator descended, I felt something release in my chest. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction. Something else. Justice. We walked out into the bright afternoon sun. I took a deep breath and smiled.